Welcome to the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast. Today our episode is the cost of building an ADU.
Welcome to the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast with Scott Whitwam, your blueprint to financial abundance. Settle in as we explore the mindset and methods for wealth building through real estate.
Welcome back. I'm Scott Whitwam, and today's podcast is talking about additional dwelling units again. But today, on this episode, we're going to talk about their cost. Yes, the cost of building an ADU. Since we've talked about all of the benefits of building ADUs and how they can help us as an investors, increased revenues, increasing property values, all of the good stuff, since then we've received a bunch of questions about the costs of building ADUs. What does it cost to put one of these on your property? What does this cost to leverage this additional asset on our properties? So if you're intrigued by the possibility of adding value, you're likely saying, how do I, maybe convert a shop, a garage, or just build an ADU on the land that I have? So we're going to tackle some of the common questions today. Specifically, how much does it cost to build one of these things? It's not like a blow-up house. You can go down to your True Value hardware store or whatever and get one and just, boom, you're done. There's a cost with all of that. And, sometimes you'll run into things like hidden fees. And so we want to talk about what to look out for and the things that actually drive costs with building ADUs. And then how do you decide if it's worth it or not? So we're actually going to break this down today into three parts. First, the type of ADUs and how they affect cost. Second, we're going to break down the expenses related to the projects and the process. And third, how to budget smart and boost your return on investment. So first off, let's talk about the type of ADUs and their cost ranges. ADUs can come in many, configurations, many sizes, many different layouts. There's lots of options. With the tiny home movement that's going across America, the container home movement, all of these things can be used and utilized. In fact, even Tesla has come up with their space age, drop it on your property ADU. But the cost will be driven by many different factors. For instance, there are two notable differences in ADUs. There is an attached and a detached version of an additional dwelling unit. And so let's take the attached one first. An attached ADU are literally what it sounds like. They're attached to the main living structure. They share generally at least one wall and have at least part of the existing foundation as the basis for their foundation and maybe even their floor. But they're literally attached to the existing dwelling unit. And attached ADUs are going to cost less, obviously, than detached ADUs because they're utilizing a portion of the existing structure. Now, prices vary, from, with oranges and bananas from California to Maine. I mean, the differences in price for everything all across the U.S., and that's going to be the same with additional dwelling units. The average cost per square foot, and that's what I like to deal in, is the cost per square foot, because then you can determine, you go, hey, we're going to build 1,000 square feet. We just multiply it by these factors, and we can get our average cost. We're going to build 500 square feet. You can kind of do the same. But the average nationwide cost to build an attached ADU is between about $150 and $250 a square foot. That includes architectural design, permits, labor, materials, and basic finishes. However, it excludes things like land costs or major prep. And when I talk about major prep, areas that are non-flat lots. So for instance, if your home is built on a hillside and you want to build an additional dwelling unit, it's going to cost considerably more for the architectural, the engineering, and probably the materials in order to build that on a non-flat surface. If the If you're building on top of solid rock, your costs are probably going to be more expensive. And it doesn't matter whether it's attached or detached. When you have some of these type of factors that come into play, it costs more money to build them. Some of the different ways that you can take advantage of existing structures that are on your property. Maybe you have a garage and, mom or dad is getting at that stage in life where they need to be closer to you. They need some assistance, and you want to convert your garage into an ADU. That would be an attached conversion. And, you can do this with basement homes. Maybe you have a home on a hill that already has a basement that you use or don't use very much, and you can convert that into its own separate additional dwelling space. You can utilize patios that exist to convert an existing patio into a space. Now, when we talk about additional dwelling units, we're generally talking about a self-sufficient space, has its own access door, has its own kitchen or kitchenette, has, bedroom and living spaces. It's the type of space that somebody could move into and they can live in without having to ever enter the main house. So it'll have its own cooling and heating, all those type of things. And so the costs obviously are going to be different than doing just maybe an add-on. So if you were just adding a bedroom on, that's going to be a way different cost, because in a bedroom, you're not going to have a kitchen. You don't have to have a separate bathroom, all those kind of things. And so, but the costs are going to vary considerably from areas of the country. And so with building an addition for an ADU, an attached one, you can do this to the side of the house, depending on the jurisdiction and setbacks, the back of the house. We're actually doing one in the front of the house. There is no back lot space, and the jurisdiction is actually allowing us to build the ADU. It's a project we have going right now to the front of the house. And I got some regional costs. I don't want to just leave you with, here's the nationwide average, but here's some regional costs. In the Northeast, so this would be like, New York, Maine, Pennsylvania, the northeastern part of the U.S., the average cost per square foot for an attached ADU is between $200 to $400 a foot. And so, you can just take your managed square footage, multiply it by those numbers, and at least get the range of the cost of the ADU you're thinking about building. Some of the things driving the prices in the Northeast are higher labor costs, higher permitting costs. Being closer in towards New York City can even drive prices up higher. And you start getting into some of the metro areas, it can get considerably more expensive. In the Midwest areas like Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, these type of areas, it's not quite as expensive. The average cost of an attached ADU runs between $150 and $300 a square foot. Labor seems to be more reasonable in those areas, and supply costs are a little bit less because of transportation. So, that area of the country runs between $150 and $300 a square. In the South, like Texas, Florida, and Georgia, the average cost is actually even a little bit less, between $100 and $215. The lowest overall average cost is actually found in Texas, which can be between, that $100 and $250. Florida actually has a low cost also. Its top isn't even that high in general on the averages. The rural areas may even skew a little bit lower in some of these areas. The cost on the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington runs between $250 and $600 a square foot. A lot of this is due to the additional cost for seismic fitting, higher demand like San Francisco Bay Area, LA, these kind of areas. Oregon and Washington typically are a little bit less expensive than California, the cost per square foot. Where I'm at in the Phoenix area, in the Maricopa County area, attached ADUs typically run about 175 to 225 a square foot on average. So there's considerable variances. Some of the things that are going to drive the cost when it comes to ADUs, and this is true whether it's attached or detached, are going to be, your labor cost in the market that you're at. The average, wages are different in New York City than they are in Des Moines, Iowa, and what they are in LA or San Francisco. Obviously, materials are different. It's easier to get materials maybe shipped to places in Wisconsin than it is in some of the bigger metro areas on each end of the coast, lumber and those type of things. Permitting fees are all over the place, depending on the jurisdictions you are. There's jurisdictions like in California. I mean, we had the Palisade fires almost, a year ago, and they haven't even got one property started because of all of the permitting problems that they have in that area. The cost of it drives everything up. But you may live in a rural area where you can just walk down to the county office or the city office and take your plans in and pay a couple $100 fee, and they stamp them and you're good to go. So permitting fees can be all over the place. And then size and design will drive costs, and it doesn't matter whether, like I said, attached or detached. Here's what's really interesting, and a lot of people, don't grasp this right away when they're planning their ADU, but ADU costs get more expensive the smaller they get per square foot, because there's a lot of things that you're going to have in similar ADUs. You're going to have an air conditioner, and it doesn't cost that much more to buy an air conditioner for 1,000 square foot ADU than it does a 500 square foot ADU. You're going to have a foundation. If you're putting a foundation, even on three sides of the property, the footers and all those things, it's not going to cost that much more to have 1,000 square foot, footer put in, foundation, slab, that kind of stuff put in, than it does on a 600 square foot. So what that means is the cost per square foot gets driven up on the smaller size ADUs. Now, the overall cost will be less, but the cost per square foot will be more. So let's talk a little bit about detached ADUs. These are standalone structures. I mean, they're basically a small version of the existing home. They literally are another house. And so a lot of times people, when they first think about an ADU, they're thinking of it in their mind like, well, it'll be like a detached garage. It'll be like a garden shed. But no, it's literally just a smaller version of the house. And they're generally, more expensive options because you're building basically a new house. You have a separate foundation, sewer lines, heating, cooling, power panels, etc. All of this is separate on the ADU. Now, even if you build an ADU utilizing existing sewer lines and existing power panels, and you're going to do sub-panels and you're going to connect, you still have all the underground utilities that have to be done. So that drives the cost up and makes these a little bit more expensive generally than an attached ADU would be. The nationwide average cost to build a detached ADU is between $200 and $400 a square foot. And again, this includes architectural design, permits, labor, materials, and basic finishes. It excludes land costs. So if you're trying to buy the lot next door, or maybe there's a partial lot next door that really can't be used to build a house, you're trying to acquire, this doesn't include any of that. Those would all drive the costs up. And major site preparations. So anytime you have a non-flat lot, or you have a lot that has a dense amount of trees, long power runs to connect power, long sewer runs, those will all drive the cost beyond the averages. So let's just remember the average is, you take the one that is very expensive and the one that's very cheap, and that's how you come to the average. So I'm not saying that 200 is the lowest you can do it for, or 400 is the highest. Those are just the average numbers nationwide. And I want to talk a little bit about the regional. I got some regional numbers too, also on detached prices. And again, they suffer from some of the same effects that attached do, labor costs, all those things. So there's many, many things. So in the Northeast, A detached ADU is going to cost between $250 and $500 a square foot. So, Boston often exceeds $400 a square foot. New York City, the same way. But rural Pennsylvania can be in the lower 200s a square foot. In the Midwest, and down in those areas, from 175 to 325, with obviously Chicago being much higher at 280 and above. As you get into the higher, denser metro areas, it's going to generally be more expensive. Property values typically are a little bit higher, and the cost to build is a little bit more expensive. In the South, Texas, Florida, Georgia, you're looking 150 to 275 a square foot. Florida averages around about 220 a square foot for building a detached ADU. There's minimal permitting hurdles in Florida compared to other jurisdictions. Rural Georgia typically tends to skew towards the lowest end of the scale, so that's a good area. The West, California, and Washington, again on the higher side, 300 to 600 a square foot. The Bay Area averages between 450 and 600 a square foot for a detached ADU. Portland and Seattle, they run in between about $300 to $400 a square foot. And then in the area that I'm at here in the Phoenix area, Maricopa County area, detached ADUs are now running $215 to $265 a square foot. It's a pretty good judge for the average cost for the ADUs in this area. But there's a lot of factors, with regards to your location, your region. There's a lot of things that can change, even inside of a state. I mean, if you're in northern Arizona, it's going to be a little bit different than being in southern Arizona. If you're in western Washington versus eastern Washington, a little bit of difference. I know most states are going to have some of those things because it's going to depend a lot on the permitting, what the jurisdictions are like, what your labor rates are, your material rates, the terrain that you're in, and the community that you're building in. I mean, obviously, if you're in Beverly Hills, it's going to cost more than it is maybe out in Santa Maria. There's some of those different factors that will play into this. But all these things can affect the overall building costs of your ADU. And, the fact is that the smaller you get, the more expensive it becomes. So the second thing I want to do is I want to break down a little bit the real costs of building an ADU. So let's look at what drives the costs of building our additional dwelling units. And we can break that really into 5 subcategories, I guess you would. Number 1 being design and permitting. This can be anywhere from about 7.5% to 15% of the overall project. The cost to hire the architect, the engineer, to go through the permitting process. And this is even before you put one shovel in the ground or nail 2 boards together. That's when you need the architect. You need him to develop the plans. That's when you're going to need the engineering reports to be able to take your city or county for your permitting. All that, it gets paid up front, and it's all related to the cost of that. And I've seen oftentimes where that can run up to, from a few $1,000s up to $30,000, depending on your city's red tape and the architect you choose. It's really interesting. You can hire, an architect, maybe for a couple $1,000s, but you can also hire another architect that may charge you $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. And I know that in our area, sometimes we get up in Paradise Valley and Scottsdale, some of those architects for some of those projects up in there are up in that, that area, $25,000, $30,000 for doing some of these projects. So the number 1 would be the architectural and the permitting. Number 2 would be the site preparation and utilities. Site prep can run as low as 10%, but in some cases I've seen it run as high as 25% of the cost of the project. And sometimes people experience sticker shock with this surprise. It's like, wow, it costs that much just to get the site prepared to be able to even build on. But in some cases, it's very complicated. connecting sewer lines, running electrical, grading, and foundation work. This can add up, especially if you're in a hilly area, if you're in a rocky area, maybe you're in an area that's built on peat or bog. All these require additional work. We have an area not too far from here where even in the name is hills, and it's basically all rocky. It's all hilly, and because of that, most of the lots in those areas are 5 acres, and they require some significant engineering. And then how are you going to get water and sewer and all of that from the main locations to the property? And it can be extremely expensive. So that's something you need to take into consideration when you're building an ADU is, do we have all the facilities we need? What is it going to take to prep the area, the site area? It wasn't cheap to probably build the house there. The ADU is not going to be that much different. Number 3 is construction and materials. And I'm going to put an average cost, for the materials and labor, that kind of stuff, probably around 40 to 50% of the overall project costs. It's pretty significant. This is the bulk of the whole entire project. It'd be, the materials for framing, roofing, insulation, windows, drywall, plumbing, flooring, and basic finishes, those types of things. And I always say it depends on if you are a champagne and caviar or a Kool-Aid and macaroni person when it comes to the finishes that you're deciding on. That will drive, ultimately your cost. For instance, if you want your ADU to have 10-foot ceilings, over 8-foot ceilings, that's going to cost more money. If you decide you don't want double pane vinyl white windows and you want triple paned wood frame windows, that's going to cost more money. Instead of having an asphalt roof, you want a tile roof. Now, I will tell you that in some HOAs, you may not have a choice on your roof, but that costs more money. If you want vaulted ceilings versus non-vaulted ceilings, if you want coffers in your ceilings, a lot of these things that people don't think about, but they affect the overall cost of putting the project together and will drive where you're at in that 40 to 50%. Number 4 is interior finishes. This easily can absorb 10 to 20% of your budget. And again, this gets back to my analogy of, are you champagne or Kool-Aid, right? Because it's very easy to splurge in this area. And if you tend to be a person who splurges on high-end custom things like high-end custom designed cabinets, top-of-the-line appliances, top-of-the-line flooring, custom lighting, all of that stuff can cost a ton of cash. But if you're looking at it as an investor and going, well, it really doesn't make sense to have that stuff. I just want to get this thing so that somebody coming in would see it, like it, and want to rent it. Or if you're using this to build additional value in your property, that this would be the thing that would add to somebody wanting to come and be able to buy this property. So mom, or, they'd have a guest suite for family or whatever it is. Those all have to go into it, because there's a way you can do this without spending a ton of cash. But sometimes people, they want everything that's in their house in their ADU. If they're living in it, because they're using the ADU as income property, and that typically will drive cost. If the house is a rental property and you're trying to make the ADU like the rental property, it's probably going to be a little bit more conservative. So you just need to determine, obviously, if you're in an upper end rental area where your top of the line rents, the homes in the area are, above average in cost and design, you may need to finish your ADU with champagne taste to attract a tenant if you're intending to monetize, the additional space. So those are all things that you have to take into consideration. But most ADUs that are for income purposes are in moderate areas, and you're going to want to finish them with, budget-friendly, fixtures. Maybe you don't do 10-foot ceilings, but maybe you do 9-foot ceilings. Maybe you don't coffer the ceilings, but maybe you use some crown molding. There's some ways that you can look at budget friendly and still give a very high-end look without busting the bank. And so those are some things to take a look at. Number 5 would be soft cost or unexpected fees. And yes, there are always unexpected fees and expenses. You always need to plan for contingencies, design changes, inspections, delays, cost overruns. A good rule is about a 10% buffer to whatever you had estimated or whatever your estimate says. Because remember, estimates are just that. They're estimates, right? So you have somebody putting this together for you on Monday, and they tell you that the lumber is going to be, for the project is going to be $3,500. You don't get to the point of ordering the lumber until Friday for being ready for the project, and now that lumber is $4,000, right? It's driving the project cost. The estimates are based upon what generally the contractors or what now, and they're just estimates, and they don't become actuals until they're, on site, they're purchased, they're on site, they're put together. So you should always have a buffer and just assume that you're going to need about 10% for buffer. All right, so let's look at a couple quick examples, considering optimal conditions, right? So with our average cost per square foot, 1,000 square foot detached ADU at $200 a square foot, that ADU is going to cost about $200,000 to build. A 650 square foot detached ADU at $265 per square foot is going to cost about $172,250. So why am I using a higher cost per square foot with the smaller ADU? Because the smaller you get, the more expensive per square foot the project gets. Because again, there's a lot of things that they just cost. I mean, let's just say a foundation is going to cost you $20,000 for a 1,000 square foot one. It may cost you $18,000 for a 650 square foot one, because a lot of the costs are baked into the actual project, and that drives the cost per square foot up. So you can see how you can have the difference pretty easy and how it can drive the price. It's not cheap. But remember, this is also a long-term investment. If you're doing this to generate revenue, I know in our area, so you got to know your numbers. I know in our area, the average one-bedroom apartment right now is renting for $1,450 a month. So if you're building a one-bedroom, ADU, and you're looking at that going, well, yeah, this is going to be better than a one-bedroom apartment, and it's going to have this, this, and this. You may be looking at generating between $1,200 and $1,600 a month right now without the appreciation of rents in this market. But the other thing you also get as an investor, you get the depreciation. So you get the tax incentives as well. And so it may not be cheap, but it may be great as a long-term investment, and it will boost the overall value of your property. And if you ever get to the point that you want to sell it, 1031 out of it into something else, now your property is worth more money, and you can leverage on that. Our third deal is budget smart to boost your return on investment. So how do we make your ADU worth it? So here's 3 smart strategies to help with that, right? Build for dual use. Design your ADU to serve multiple purposes. Maybe you design it so that it fits well in a short-term rental environment. Maybe you build it so that it can function as an office or a guest suite. Flexibility increases your property's value and the rental potential. So flexibility. Number 2 would be leverage. Look at different finance options. If you're not paying cash, if you're not doing this cash, look at the different finance options that are out there and how can you leverage this into the cheapest form of other people's money available. Can this ADU be financed through a home equity loan, just using the value or the equity that's in the existing home that's on the property? Can you do it with a renovation loan? So there may be some options in order to build this thing at some of the lower interest rates versus trying to do this with some of the higher rate construction mortgage type products. Some states even offer ADU grant programs. Now, my state, Arizona, does not, but I know I've been told that California, for example, offers grants, and they can be up to like $40,000 to offset design and permitting costs. You should look into it in your jurisdiction. That might help offset some of the expenses. I don't know, every state's different, so you have to look into the states that have prioritized maximizing the available housing that's in the area. And think long term when it comes to return on your investment. In many markets, ADUs can boost the value of your property, 20-30%, and generate thousands of dollars a month in rent. So when we're looking long term, as property values are increasing, that ADU is adding significant value to the property, but can also generate long-term income. That means as investors, we can recoup the investment and take advantage of tax incentives through depreciation. I love that. So here's a bonus tip. If you can, keep your design simple. The more complex the layout, the more expensive it gets. Generally, box shapes typically are the least expensive, whether it's a rectangle, square, those type of things. You start doing curvature in the architects and pop-outs and all these things, it gets much more expensive. So you want to keep your footprint pretty standard, and and then look around there's architects out there who may have done several ADUs, and they'd be willing to do yours with one of their pre-designed plans at a more reasonable cost. You don't have to have the number one architect in your state do your plans. You can save thousands of dollars by selecting the right architect. And then before you start, call some contractors, get some prices, spend time planning and putting your budget together, figure out what this is going to cost you. These are the kind of things that'll separate smart investing, smart investors who are investing in ADUs, and help them avoid some of the costly mistakes. That's all for this episode. I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast. Check out our previous episodes on related real estate investing topics. I invite you to subscribe today and be part of our growing community. You can always find the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. This is Scott Whitwam. Be sure to join me next time on the Whitwam Wealth Real Estate Podcast, where we're wealth building through real estate.